What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to go ahead and create this desert scene. As always, you're going to want to go ahead and head over to Patreon where you can grab all of the requirements completely for free, and there you will find the canvas size, you will find the palette so you can follow along with the exact same colors, as well as a guide as well, just to help us through today's design. As always, when you're done with your finished design, make sure to tag me in it over on Instagram or Facebook. They're great places for me to see your work. And of course, subscribe to the channel for weekly Procreate tutorials. But if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and check out my Patreon, where I've got over 130 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording, and with 3 more added every single month, the catalogue just continues to grow. So with all that said, enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, you're going to want to go ahead and insert the guide, and I'm actually going to rename the layer and call it guide as well, just so that we make sure we keep hold of it. And that is just simply a PNG image of the sketch that I've previously drawn ahead of today's recording. So if I go up to my actions, go to the option of add and insert a photo, you can do exactly that. Insert the PNG image that I've provided in as a layer and just tap on it and rename it at the top there, and just make sure you call it something that you recognize. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, drag it underneath our guide. We can tap on our guide as well and bring its opacity right down to something, say like 10% or something around there. And on this empty layer, we're going to go to our colors and grab the color in the bottom right of the palette, drag it onto the screen. We're going to zoom out a little bit. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the far right column, then go to your layers. I typically separate my background before merging it into one layer. So I'm going to create a new layer. Go to my brush and change it to airbrushing and the soft brush. Let's go to a brush size of around about 40% here. And you're going to want to create a gradient across the sky here. So we're going kind of a bit of a diagonal angle there, as you can see, and just allowing that dark blue to live up in the top left corner primarily, a little bit darker over there, into this lovely blue tone. And then we'll create another new layer. Go to our colors and grab the top right of the palette. And in a similar fashion, a little bit of a diagonal kind of angle here across our sky, trying our best to just simply blend it in to the rest of the sky and go across. Now, the reason I separate my layers is because hypothetically, if I don't like the color that I've implemented here for the yellow, for example here, I can go ahead and just turn it off and then redo it and see the differences. You have so much more opportunity for flexibility. Now, you can pinch those together onto one layer, or you can swipe from left to right, group them together, rename the group, and just call it BG. Now, while we're working on the background, let's go ahead and actually create one more new layer. Let's go to our blend mode and change it to the option of add. We'll keep the same color, same brush. We're just going to bring it down a lot smaller in size. So probably around about, say, the 7% mark. And roughly around about here, you're going to want to tap a few times just to get this kind of orb-like color. And then from there, just make your brush a bit bigger again, like 15, go really lightly in a rounded sort of shape, just to create that kind of luscious sun there in the sky. Now my camera is probably making that a little bit too overexposed in terms of the whole scene. It's quite dark blue, so just trust the colors that you've got in the palette. Of course, they do match up to mine. Let's then start blocking in the rest of the design. So let's go ahead and collapse BG down. Let's create a new layer. We'll go to our colors and we will grab the top of the first column. We can just stick with the soft airbrush, say around about, say, 4 to 5%. And we're going to want to go ahead and follow this horizon line here. And what you want to do is you want to press like fairly firm, like a little bit lower than it. And then just above it, you just want to get nice and light, just to allow the ground just to basically just run out into the distance, especially in that little gap, because that's where we're going to be able to see it. To just blend that out a little bit so it can blend up and into the hills and in the distance. And then just continue with the same brush, but make it a little bit bigger and just block in the bottom half here with some good firm pressure, like so. Then we're going to go ahead and again continue blocking things in. So we'll go ahead and we will create a new layer just in front of that little layer we just made a second ago, and swipe from left to right on both and group them together. And let's just rename this and call it ground, so that you know exactly what I'm referring to when we come back to it. We're going to go ahead and create 2 new layers again, left to right on both, and group them together. We'll rename this group and we're going to call it path. And then on the bottom layer out of the 2, we're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the color here, top of the 4th column. We want to go ahead and change our brush. You could use something like the monoline brush. You could use inking in the studio pen, which is exactly what I'm going to do. The size doesn't really matter, like 19% is fine. You can get quite fine with it. And you're just going to go ahead and try your best to create kind of step-like shapes. Now we're doing these kind of steps here. So every time you kind of imagine that there's a step, you kind of imagine a flat line down, across, and then flat line down, across kind of vibe. That's basically the simple principle. So you're going to end up with what will be a quite sort of jagged, very step-like shape on this left-hand side. It's not to say we can't come back to it and adjust it anyway. So for now, just try your best just to come in from the edge and just kind of create sort of gradual kind of bumps and lumps down here. I wouldn't overthink it at this stage. Again, we can refine it once we actually draw in our actual steps. We'll come along this line here, up in towards the top half of the path, and then come down again, around here, create like a bit of a sharp change then in direction, and then we can just bring the path all the way along. And again, we really will sort of adjust this later on. For now, I'm just introducing some bumps and lumps, and then all the way off to the very bottom right of the palette, or the canvas, sorry. And let's go ahead then and just link these two together. So just very lightly now, just trying to link the very top of the path together at the very top there, and drag and drop the color in. Let's then go ahead and collapse the path down. We'll go ahead and we'll create 2 new layers again, left to right on both, group them together and rename the group. And we're just going to call this one, we'll call it right rock, because it's going to be the rock that sits underneath the main one here. I've called it right Rick, it doesn't really matter. The bottom layer out of the 2, again, we're going to go ahead and continue with the exact same color. We're just going to get this shape in here. Now I want to go ahead and make sure that at least towards the bottom here, there's some interesting shape with this rock, because ultimately that is a shape of its own. And then this then comes off the top of it. And then we're going to come across underneath the rock ledge there. And then from here, you want to try and create some interesting shapes. This is why we use sometimes the studio pen instead of like the monoline, because your pressure will equally add in a whole new element of the variety to the shape, because you can just mess around with your pressure as you're drawing and see what other little bumps and lumps you create. Then drag and drop the color in. Let's then go ahead and move across. We're going to collapse the right rock down. We're going to tap on the path and create 2 new layers again, left to right on both, group them together, and we'll call this main rock. We'll try to call it main rock rather than Rick. And the bottom layer out of the 2, we're going to go ahead and draw in the main big shape here. Now it actually starts here. So if we start here first of all and just draw in the very bottom shape there, then go all the way to the bottom of the screen. So I've just drawn all the way from here, all the way down. Then we know that that connects to the edge of the screen. So it means that once we make our way around here, and we're just introducing all of these rocky shapes here underneath the main shape there, we can go ahead and drop the color in. So we're going to go ahead and go all the way up here, up underneath there, up the very top end there, and then along the top. Now you want to try your best to try and do this in a long, smooth action, because you don't want too many bumps and lumps on that top area. And then from there, you've got to go up the top area here and create the kind of step-like rocky structure that comes all the way down. And then because we've gone to the edge here, we've equally gone to the edge here, we can drag and drop the color in like so. You can see it all starting to come together. We're going to go ahead and collapse main rock down. Again, we're going to create 2 new layers, left to right on both, group them together, rename it, and we're just going to call this extra rocks. Now don't worry, towards the end and throughout the tutorial, you'll be able to flatten these as we go. Again, bottom layer out of the 2. You want to zoom in down here in this little gap and just start creating some interesting rocks. I've outlined a few of them where I specifically know I want a few to live, and you can just color them in, drag and drop the color in, and you can create loads of little areas of detail. Don't forget though, the more you draw, of course, the more you've got to color in, the more you've got to highlight, the more you've got to detail. So don't do too many, but I'll come back to this area in just a second once I've done the rocks over here, because I don't want to sort of add in too many that then sort of get in the way of this. First of all, I want to just see what we can fill out, see what kind of negative space we're left with, and then go from there. We'll do another one just underneath here, all sorts of interesting shapes to them. I'm trying to make sure my brush is fairly sort of jittery as I make my way across. Here we'll go ahead and kind of create like a bit of a flat rock here to start with, and then maybe it bumps up a tiny bit and then comes down and goes back up again, maybe into like slightly, maybe one slightly in front of it, perhaps. Can't really talk today. Let's go ahead and get in here along the edge. And then I'm going to create a fairly large one that just sits right underneath our scene here. I'm going to keep it fairly sharp and structural upwards like that, and then drag and drop the color in. And then I can go ahead and probably chuck in like another, I think I'll leave that gap. In fact, I'll leave it, but I'll focus more on adding in sort of smaller elements. So I'm going to crowd some together here, and I want them to be all interesting different shapes to one another, hopefully. I'm going to cram another one in there, another one here. These ones are going to get a lot of love from the light source as well, so you can really have some fun with these ones later on with the coloring phase. A little something like that, just as long as you've got a little bit of kind of some sort of additional detail. I mean, you don't have to sort of leave it at the end. You could always introduce more to this layer as we go. This sort of area down here can be nice and dense with lots of detail. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it just like that. That structurally looks pretty cool to me. The next thing to do is just block in some extra elements in the background. You can open up your background group if you've still got it, or just create a new layer. It's totally fine. Just create a new layer, drag it in front of your sky and under your sun, and then go to your colors. Grab the middle color in the second column from the right. We're going to stick with the same concept. We're going to just very quickly go along here and then let go, and then go from your start point all the way off to the left-hand side. And then you can zoom in and you can just create the interesting sort of landscape there in the distance. Very, very distant. And you then want to go ahead and run your pen all the way down to here. So you're going to run underneath into there, continue that on in the distance. I'm going for some sharp sort of points to them, some of them a little bit flatter. I also probably want to vary them a little bit in terms of height as well, in terms of structure, so a little bit higher there. And then go all the way through, a little bit further on this left-hand side, and then all the way off to the right. So you should have a continuous line from left to right, meaning you can drag and drop the color into that bottom half. One more new layer to create. To create a new layer, drag it underneath the last one. Go to your colors and grab the top of the second column from the right. This one's just a tiny bit further back. You can just, in the gaps here, you can just sort of draw in some very, very distant hills, like an additional layer of them. You don't have to do it in every single gap. That's why I'm not trying to force it too much. I'm just seeing what kind of little gaps I've got, seeing if I can put anything in there. And to be honest, that might actually only be it, just a tiny little bit of extra hillside in the distance. Now, before we get started with adding in color and detail and highlights and shadows, I want to start off with the lighting. And it's not something I traditionally do. By the way, if you're finished with your background and sky, keep hold of your sun because it's an add blend mode, but you can pinch all of this content in the background into one layer if you need to. But we're going to go right to the very top. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the color in the top right of the palette. We're going to go to our layer again and change the blend mode from normal to the option of pin light. You want to scroll down until you find pin light. We're going to go to our brush and change it to airbrushing in the soft brush. You probably want it around about the 40% mark, nice and large. And you just want to go around in a circular motion and just show how bright that sunshine is. So just a big kind of glow from that top area there. And that's it. You won't see too much of it, but you'll be able to see this kind of radial effect happening around here, just showing how bright the sun is. And that will affect all the highlights and shadows that we draw in a moment, but it gives us a nice bright light source straight off the bat. So let's work on our main structure here. So let's go ahead and collapse the extra rocks down. We want to be in the main rock group. We have an empty layer already. We can tap on it and clipping mask it to the main shape. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab the top of the fifth column. We're going to go to our brush and we want inking and the dry ink. That's what I'm going to use for all of this design today. It's something I'm just really enjoying at the minute. You can use a different brush if you like to. It's just got a taper on the end and a lot of texture in it. So we're going to go ahead and we'll start off with the opacity probably around about 35%. And I think size about 30 to start with. It's pressure sensitive anyway, so we can definitely get away with adding more and more. Now, the sun, of course, is here. It's going to cast onto the very top edge here. That's just a dummy line for a minute. And then it's also going to go ahead and kind of bounce down into this kind of bottom area down here, somewhat on the edge of some of these here too. I also imagine there's a bit of reverb light, so it's bouncing up and hitting the underside of our rocky shape here. So let's go ahead and first of all think about the top edge. I want to go ahead and sort of run this color along here. If you can do it in one brush stroke to start with, that'd be great, because you can just lay in the kind of basic area where you want the sun to cast onto our big rock up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and run in like another line. And then everything you leave in the gaps is just simply like a groove of the rock where we can then integrate shadows into it, of course. And I'm going to run that across here, probably get a bit chunkier with it there, overlap it a few times because we want it somewhat bright, and then let that edge just run out. And then from there, I'm equally going to go ahead and work on the underside here. And I want to kind of focus it so that it's like all the way under here. There is a line here in the guide that should help you as to where you want to kind of position this. But I just want to sort of show that there is like light bouncing around the underside here, going all over the place. And you can draw in multiple lines and overlap them, because then you get all of this like texture on the underside of the rock and it looks fantastic. Now the highlights don't stop there. We go ahead and equally do some on these little rocks here. So I'm going to bring the size down to 19%. I want to go along the top edge of this rock here and down. And then from there, maybe like a line that diverts off from there, or something like this. Then I've got a line here that separates, and then let's go ahead and imagine the light does cast onto there too. And you can let go and then overlap, as I said, to create build up of color and highlight. Zoom all the way out, just get an idea for that light coming through. And then I think we leave big gaps and then say, well, the light doesn't then start to affect anything else until it gets right over here. And then might even go bigger with the brush size, about 30%, just so I can be a bit more kind of aggressive with the application. And then I'm going to go down this surface here and kind of up and in towards like what will be a bit of light casting into this groove now, because the sun's a little bit higher. Maybe it starts to make its way into here. I always say if you can come up with a convincing story, that is all that matters. So we've got a little something there. Now the only thing we also need to do now is actually just triple check that our path is in front. So we're going to drag our group just in front of our main rock group. That way, if I go back to the layer we were just working on, I now see that my color can't go beyond and underneath that path. And that is exactly what we want. We want to set that brush size down a little bit smaller again, maybe like 19%, and just show maybe how the light is just catching on a few little rocks up here and grooves of the flow of the land as it falls down into this sort of crevasse here. And that's it. I don't think we need to add in much more than that. That's looking pretty good. I think the only thing I would do is just hold down on my eraser, set my eraser down to something like 26% and the size. Because I've held down on my eraser, it switched it to inking and the dry ink brush. It's a quick and easy shortcut to do that. And then I would get in here and maybe just break down my solid line there with like a bit of an erase through it. So 60% maybe, just to be a bit bolder, just to create some more detail and break down the really quite consistent line that I created. So that's just something to look out for in your own work, should you have equally done that. And go back to your brush again, because we now also need to make our way up this edge over here. So we're going to start along kind of the edges here. I'm going to go to, oh no, we'll stick to 35%. We don't want to go too big too early. So we're just going to draw in a bit of a highlight down here. I'm going to follow this line all the way down and then integrate a little bit of highlight on there too. And then I'm going to have like a bit of a flat ledge there that's going to get some more light. And then I'm going to cut across with a quite flat and then down again, highlight on there too. Again, we're just imagining where that light's coming across. Now we've got this main line here. I would call this a main line because it's the majority of this kind of big body over here. And now you need to start to add highlight in that main body and kind of make the decision as to where that light is casted. You can do something quite dramatic like that, and I'm going to do something like that, but I just need to make sure that I don't go too low with it. And then from there you can just say, hang on, I imagine that the light's going to come down here. I imagine that it also comes off at different angles from that point. It also goes up again. And then maybe there's like a little bit of a squiggle that comes across that's catching some light as well. And then in here, you can do these little diagonal lines and then a diagonal line down. So like a dash and a dash. And you can create lots of very simple, easy kind of ledges with this kind of rock formation. So it's just cast in on another little bit of rock. You can go even smaller if you want to like a 9%. So you can get some very thin areas of light. I could join them together with this kind of diagonal line here. And you can just break down those quite solid, large shapes, or introduce, as I'm doing now, a little bit of a larger one towards the top. I'm just going to keep going until I've filled out this entire space here, because I want to show how much of the rock is just sliding down, adding in some highlight on here. You can build up some of them as well. You don't have to leave them as just kind of the edge highlights. You can really blanket them in lighting if you want to. Zoom all the way out, don't get lost in it. Just see how that lighting's coming across and casting onto your rock formation there. And then just make sure you go all the way kind of down and somewhat meet that horizontal area that we created. And just make sure the top of this is just really bright, because then it just shows that this is in front of that. This is a little bit further back. I'm going to introduce tiny little squiggles just for little bits of information a bit further back. Also connect a few of those together, maybe like another little dash, 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 and that's it. We'll leave it, we'll try to do less, and obviously we can also take away from it should we need to. It's now where we move into some really bright highlights. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and clipping mask it and change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We're going to go to our colors and jump to the middle of the 5th column there. Same brush, about 19%. I would make the opacity 35% roughly, just to sort of take your time. And then it's now where you can draw on top of those lines, the ones that you think are your main ones there, and say, yeah, they're the ones that are getting the most light in. The sun is just bouncing straight onto it. Avoid doing absolutely everywhere, but you want to try and make sure that really good, bold, beautiful, bright highlights in some areas. And zoom all the way out. Take an idea for what you've done so far. Don't overdo it. Keep it to a minimum if you can. This edge over here towards the right is most likely going to get the majority of your highlights. So you can sort of use that as a guide really, and then maybe a tiny bit along there too. Equally, we want to go ahead and brighten up our main rock formation here. So I'm going to go ahead and go along the top edge there, brightening this up, giving the edge of the formation a really lovely highlight. I might even go 30% on the size now, just to try and pack it in a large brushstroke way. Lovely, a little bit of brighter tone on there. You can then go ahead and say, actually, I think the light equally casts right across here too, maybe even a little bit on there as the sun makes its way across. You don't have to do everywhere, as I've equally done here, just left a little bit of a gap. And then we'll do the underside. We can imagine that maybe the light does cast right underneath here. It's brightening this up, especially maybe down here. You can go ahead and add in a good chunk of color potentially in there. And equally, you can go ahead and set the brush size to like 19% and go on to these little rocks here, because the light is bouncing underneath there and now it's just bouncing around. So you can go ahead and sort of bring that light in around there too. A little bit there, maybe even a tiny bit there too. Zoom all the way out, get an idea for what you're brightening up. Go along there. And then maybe if I set the brush size to like a 9% now, and go ahead and just detail this with a bit of a brighter edge to it. Just going to brighten this up quite a bit, because I want that light to really look as if it's bang, crashing right under there. Now, if you do too much, just hold down on your eraser and set your eraser to airbrushing, for example, on the soft brush. And then just go to like a 2% and just fade it out, like blend it out. So you can blend out that highlight, making sure it kind of fades in some areas. And then at the bottom there, it's nice and bright. I can fade that out on the rear there, because I feel like I've added in a little bit too much there potentially. And go to your brush again, but make sure you do accent some random areas here. So with a 9% brush size, just accent random, not parallel too much, but little random areas of rock that you think the light would bounce back off the ground and up and onto your formation here. A little bit under there, just to show how it's, again, all bouncing around ideally. Now we need to go ahead and fill in all the gaps with some shadows. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors and move into the middle of the 4th column there. Same brush, 35% opacity. I think we can go to around about 30% just to start with. And let's just start up in the top left here, just to make it nice and easy. We're going to come down with some more vertical lines, just like before. And you're kind of just carrying on this kind of philosophy along here, but showing deep, dark grooves in the rock now that absolutely no lighting is getting to at all. You can go in behind some of your highlights. You could find a little crevice such as here, darken that up a little bit in there, just to show a little bit of sort of additional contour to the land. And then you want to go ahead and just go along this flat surface here for the main kind of rock that's coming out of here. And then that should give you a little bit of separation. You can go ahead and just maybe emphasize that with 1 or 2 little coats if you need to, just add in some extra color tone in the empty space. Now, another thing we have to bear in mind is the path while we're down here. So I'm going to go ahead and set the brush size to about 19%. I'm going to set the opacity to 50. Where we've got our path and we've at least got the guide of it, we want to kind of draw in like quite vertical lines here, because over here, I'm imagining, first of all, it's in the shade completely. So we're just going to draw in lots of vertical kind of lines at angles to show angular area of rock. And then in a minute, we'll darken that up even more. But that's the sort of fall off of our path and the dark side underneath there. Equally, there would be a little bit of a triangular shape here that's going to end up quite dark. So I'm going to kind of draw in a bit of a horizontal line and then give it one big coat, and I can reveal the edge of the path. And then if I need to, I can go ahead and kind of draw in some random little scrape lines here. They're very subtle, but it's just a matter of now just working around the lighting, bringing this path to life a little bit more as well. And then we can go ahead, and I'm going to start down here before I get to the main part up there. So first of all, I imagine that this little crevice here is going to be really dark. So I'm going to come down there. I will set the opacity back to 35% because I love building up the color. So I'm going to bring that in, and then I'm just going to create all the lines that follow suit with the kind of contour of the land. So I'm going to come down a little bit like this, showing just how the rock goes all the way down, meets the sand at the bottom. And you're just drawing in little kind of diagonal lines, little something behind, again, as I mentioned, your highlights, but you can equally go ahead and create lots of vertical lines off the edge of your path here. You can go ahead and do a little something like that. Further down. In here, we want to definitely darken this up a tiny bit as well, just to give, again, a bit of separation to the path. So you can see me drawing right up against the shape that I've created, like so. Zooming out, you get an idea for, again, where everything gets compressed down because you've zoomed out, all the detail and data gets crushed down. And then I'm going to go ahead and darken up in here too, going over it, as you can see, a few times there, just to create some additional shadows and different variety of shadows too. They don't all need to be the same. And then, as you can see, I've got this kind of swoop line here for the rock. So we're not going to go above that while we're working down here. So you can just go ahead and continue just darkening up, following suit with the contour lines I've included in the guide. You can darken up very deep grooves here, such as here where the light just won't be casting. We do have a slightly darker tone in a minute. So what this tone is for the minute is just us allowing us to sort of lay out a blueprint of all the rock, how it all flows down, etc. And then in a minute, when we get into our really deep dark shadows, we can go ahead and just really plan it out on top of what we've just drawn here. So here at the bottom, maybe I can go ahead and sort of create like a bit of a rocky shape at the bottom, and then a couple of lines down. Don't overdo it. Set the brush maybe to like a 9% as well, and try and get some very small areas of detail. A couple of little scrape lines in there to signify a bit of a groove in some rock. Go across lines as well, like really just honestly just send like a line like that all the way across. Sometimes rocks are easier to not think about, if that makes sense. It's just easier just to chuck it in, see what it looks like. In here, I'm going to go ahead and darken just here in behind this rocky area, all the way down to the ground and up a little bit. And then we have to move into our main big body up here. So we're going to go 30% on the brush size, and we're just going to go ahead and sort of really just chuck a big sort of dark groove in along this kind of side profile here. And then don't forget, you are 30% on the opacity, so you can go ahead and sort of layer in color as you go. Up here, you can't really see too much, but it is present. So you can just go ahead and draw in some lines, following suit. Under here, where it touches this new rock here that we're going to color in a minute, you want to darken up under there just to make sure that there's a connecting kind of shadow to that. I'm going to set the brush size to 19% and follow my highlight all the way kind of down, really darkening that up and into, say, like this groove here. So it's very, very subtle, but you can start to see all of those lines starting to come to play. Create lines and rocks that are sort of the flow of the rock with curves upwards. Just a little occasional kind of flick upwards to cut across your kind of parallel lines to one another, just to create a singular kind of shaped rock almost. I can go along here, follow that, and then when I get under here, I can just darken this in this space here. So I want to create like a bit of a dark groove here where that big rock just sits on top of the crush land almost underneath that supports this big structure. So you should end up with a little something like this. We then want to go to our layers and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it, change the color to the bottom of the fourth column, and follow suit with exactly the same principles. So let's just first off start over here, really simple. I just want you to first of all set your brush size to say like 54% or some 50 to 60, tip it on its side. I've got a 35% opacity, and I'm just going to darken this up with just a very light coat to start with. Then I'll switch it back to 19 and get quite granular in there and try and sort of darken up these little sort of groove lines. So just creating some very, very deep dark grooves here in some of those browns that I created, and just trying to darken it up. Now, I would advise you to sort of not really think about this too much, because we can come back to it once we've done our path. So a little something like this just for the moment. Let's then zoom in over here. We've got another sort of crevasse down here. So we want to go behind our path here. I'm going to bring the opacity down to 20% because it is a fairly strong dark tone for now. And then again, I'm just going to darken up behind our path, giving it some nice separation, and then get into some of those dark lines there and emphasize the dark shadowy like tones in there. 9% is going to look fantastic as well, because you can be thinner than the lines that you initially drew. So now you can get quite sharp with it and also kind of emphasize the groove a bit more. And when you zoom out, you should just have a little bit of a dark kind of spot there. Let's carry on up this left-hand side where we can get into some of the tones we've already created. So I've still got a 9% size and a 20% opacity. Where I've added in some of these dark browns, I can get in there now and kind of detail in a bit more and just darken up in there to show some areas that really are not facing the light at all. A little bit of a dark groove there too. I can go ahead and just darken up in certain random spots in behind some of those shadow tones, especially here where you've got kind of two joined together. This dark area then would be like quite a deep dark groove, and so you can just put in some dark tone in there. Again, zoom all the way out. Let's just triple check what we're doing. I'm going to go over towards my brown tones here and just draw in some more purposeful detailed lines that are just lines with little sort of thin fall off either side of them. So like a few of them, they go off either side, and a little few here too, for example. That's just like the darkest, deepest point of this dark groove. And the browns then are kind of the mid-tones of this big crack and groove in the rock. I'm going to introduce like a very large one here, because I've got a lot of brown tone in there, and I can just show how dark this kind of little area here is and just blend it out using the dry ink brush. You can actually blend quite nicely with this brush if you take your time. And you could even go even smaller if you want to, down to like a 3%, and show very, very minute areas of kind of crack and detail in here. Just a little something like that, just to add in a little bit more content. We can go ahead and set the brush to, let's go back to the 9% range. Let's tip it on its side a tiny bit and try and just darken up in there a bit more. So I'm going to go up to 19, just so I can tip it on its side and create a bit of a shadow here, separating the fallen big sort of slab that we're seeing, almost Pride Rock-like design, where we can then separate some of these areas here from that rocky structure. And again, I think I could get away with like a little bit in there too. And to be honest, you could spend a lot of time here just getting in behind a lot of those highlight tones, maybe thinking, could I add a shadow? Could I not? And then in general, you could just set the brush size to like a 30% and give this left-hand side a little bit of a light coat, just so that the left-hand side is quite dark. Don't overdo that though if you do it, because you don't want to sort of make that the darkest kind of shadow, because then you need to reflect that everywhere. So if you did do that, you'd have to, for example, darken up down here a little bit more, because it has to match what a shadow looks like across the board. So just bear that in mind. Let's move into this area here. So again, I'm looking for all those deep crevasses here in the side where the sun is just not catching. So I can go to like 9%. I can go ahead and just, for example, here, this is going to get a lot of dark tone in here. Lots and lots of dark tone. Send it up one of the crack lines and just let that fade out. A little bit in that bit of brown, but ultimately this has got to get nice and dark here. You can get quite sharp with it as well. Lovely. I'm going to set the brush opacity to 35%, get a bit braver with it. And I'm going to follow suit by just following a lot of those brown lines that I created before and just emphasizing any sort of dark cutaways into the land, like so. A little bit more across here. Seeing what we can come up with. Now we can actually set the opacity even lower to 20% and 19. And then again, just in general, just give a few of those dark lines a little bit of a shadow alongside them. So just sort of blend over the top, not necessarily left or right specifically, but you can just sort of darken up in here, just like we just did a moment ago up here, and just give them a little bit of a darker coating. Now you don't want to sort of darken it up too much, because the brown that we've initially laid down as kind of the base shape for this, that is the actual color of the land. These just areas here are just very, very dark. And then likewise underneath here, I want to go ahead and follow this now underneath that kind of rocky shape. And then I just need to make my way all the way under it, showing that that is just not getting any light at all. Up there, set the brush to 9%, and then you can just create lots and lots of interesting kind of little dark ledges in there. But ultimately you want the center of it to be quite dark. So this is where we're going so far. We're going to continue on and just create all the underside of this really dark shadow. So just drawing in lots of dark lines and rocky areas here, trying to isolate kind of rocky shapes. So I'm drawing in purposely now, like all these little sort of hexagonal and whatnot shapes in the rock here to just create a little bit more detail. I can cut across some of these areas here just to create, again, dark grooves. I've got to follow suit with a lot of those brown lines that I created, and looking for where I've really packed in the color in this area here, for example. Just increase the opacity. I think that's 35% now. A little bit more in there. I'm just trying to separate all these rocky shapes from one another, emphasizing them. I love the contrast now that we're building up between these two areas. I'm going to just bring in a bit of a dark tone in there too, a little bit more to the underside of there. And then we have to kind of bring the shadows up and onto there. We're not quite done down here though, so we'll just carry on for a minute with the 20% opacity, follow in suit with some of those lines, creating all the rocky areas. And cut across at different angles, you know, really try and break down the rocks and create interesting kind of formations down there. You don't want the lines all too perfect. You want to create cracks and grooves and cutaways and so on in these areas. I'm going to go ahead and darken up between these two highlights, because that looks like it could do with like a little bit of a dark groove in between. And likewise up towards the top there. And maybe a tiny little bit underneath our path here, just to, again, give it a tiny little bit of separation. But definitely up here, because these areas here are part of the path, but they're just not going to be getting much light at all. And then there's an argument there to say, well, there shouldn't be too harsh of a shadow, but I just want to make sure it's very obvious that the path is on top and not part of it just yet, until it makes its way much, much further up. So lots and lots of grooving, lots of cutaways, lots of everything that you can think of to describe it. Let's go to 19%, let's go to 35% opacity, and then we're just going to go ahead and follow suit up here and along some of these brown lines, creating, again, just cuts into the rock formation, following the brown blueprint that you laid out before, along that top edge, creating some large areas of shadow potentially. If you feel like there's a deep dark groove there, you can create like a deep dark groove off the point there on the end, and that might come in handy later on. I'm definitely going to darken up just behind this little point here, because that's the connecting kind of point where these two areas connect. You can set your brush size then to like a 9% if you want to, and really kind of get quite scrapey and like draw in lots and lots of lines following the sort of flow of the rock, like we did over on the tall area. But we're now sort of drawing it in here just to kind of, again, show all the grooves of the rock and the flow of it. And then you cut across occasionally and create deep grooves that just don't sit very parallel to one another. And you can have so much fun just taking your time to build up rock. Rock is a bit of a tricky thing to do, I must admit. So if you are a bit stressed, you're well in your right to be. It's a bit of a tricky thing to do, but it's just a matter of building up grooves in your head and thinking about the shape of it. And then even down into this highlight area, I can draw in a bit of a deep groove there, just to kind of break up that big general highlight area. I'm going to fluctuate between 19 and the smaller, what size is it? 19 and 9. I'm at 19 currently, just trying to see if I can darken up with like a little bit of a shade almost to some of these grooves, more towards the underside. So if you find like a line that you want to darken up, just give it a tiny little bit of a shadow on the underneath. That's perfectly fine. Come along into there. Zoom all the way out. Let's just take an idea for what we've done so far. Really happy with this area. This area is looking quite nice and detailed under here, although this area just here just needs a bit darkening. So I'm going to go 30%, tip it on its side, really light, so 35% brush size, just darken up underneath there. I'm going to try and darken up in this little groove as well, show general quite just dark shadows, and in here too, just to try and bring this area here outwards, a bit more closer towards us. I could darken up the rear of this kind of rock as well. Imagine that it doesn't get quite a lot of light, a little bit of a groove in there too, and a little bit of dark tone just there in behind. What else can we shadow? Let's shadow in behind here too. So this is the main structure of this whole point of this tutorial. So you are going to need to spend a bit more time on here. Just like up there, set your brush size to 9% and get back in here and start creating even more detail. In fact, you could even go to a 4 if you really wanted. And again, create all these lovely detailed kind of cracks in the rock here. And likewise here too, you know, really go for it. Isolate little shapes and triangular shapes, curved shapes, everything, as if there's lots of rock that's just crushed underneath here. That will look absolutely brilliant. And try and do like random lines occasionally, like one like this, just a little bit more horizontal. And then maybe even like one that goes a little bit against the grain and goes this way instead, because I can wrap it over this rock. And zoom in all the way out. You just want to get an idea that there's kind of rock and land mass that has been crushed underneath there. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go back up to here. You can see me jumping around a little bit. I'm going to go back up to the 30% there and just darken up one area here in particular. Just like here, just darkening that up, giving this area a bit more of a random dark set of grooves in comparison to the rest of the structure. A little bit more under there, and I think I'll equally try and sort of crack off with a sort of 9 to 6%, something like that up here as well, like a crush kind of horizontal line set here. And then again, I really want to darken up this groove here. Awesome. So that has come together very nicely. The only thing I want to finish up with is just a little bit of dark tone here. As always, I'll give you an opportunity in a second just to pause mine so you can go ahead and see exactly what I finish up with at this point, just so that you've got something to try and aim for if you're participating, but at your own pace. I think we could probably leave it a bit like this, but I could easily sit here as well and just continue on and on and on, detailing and detailing and detailing. So I'm going to zoom out. This is what you want to be able to pause at this particular point if you want to try and sort of match up to some details that I've put in here in terms of the shadows. Now at this stage, we're going to go ahead and add in a further light source. So we'll tap on a new layer, create a new layer and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab then this tone here, bottom of the 5th column. Bring that opacity right down to 20%. Let's set the size though to about 30. I just want to go ahead and find some areas here where I've got dark lines and just add in the tiniest little bit of sky kind of reverb of the lighting. So the sky, the blue, would also be lighting up parts of this area here. So I can go ahead and follow suit with like a little bit of a blue line occasionally to say, yes, it's not in sunlight, but this little ledge here, for example, above a dark groove that you've created, I'm imagining that there's a little bit of sky blue just landing on here. Very, very light in some areas, just to kind of show, again, a little bit of that lighting from above. Here, maybe just a little bit along there, and maybe a tiny bit along here too. Little bits of blue from the sky. And in fact, let's go ahead and try and add in like a little bit up there too, where the sun isn't catching, but there is light from above. So just a little extra kind of detail like this. Again, I think this is something you could really sit and kind of blend in, spend a bit more time just trying to add in a good coating of it, but not too much. And equally, I think I've gone a bit too low. So I'm just going to grab my eraser and just delete that down here. It needs to be somewhat towards the top edge. You can go to your brush again. You can go ahead and add in some along here too. So like a little bit of blue on some of these areas towards the top. Just like a bit of blue in there. Any horizontal ledges that are not facing the light source, you can add a bit of blue onto the top of. Maybe even a little bit here too. Just random areas that you think the sun can't catch, but the sky from above would. So like maybe a little bit into here too. It's kind of trying to be very, very, very sparing with it. And I think I'm going to leave it because I can always add more later. Now we're going to follow suit with a lot of the information and styling but with this area here. So we're going to go ahead and collapse main rock down. I urge you to keep your layers if you can, but if you can't, based on your iPad, just tap on it and flatten it. We then want to go ahead and go to the right rick or right rock, depending on how you spelt it. Tap on the empty layer and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab then the top of the 5th column. Go to your 35% opacity, size 19 just to start with. And then you want to go ahead and start detailing this. So again, I've got this lovely rocky kind of shape here that I can see. And I want to subtract it almost from the actual big surface of the rock here. So I want to sort of bring this little guy out here a bit more. And then I can go up some of these and go along, follow across a tiny bit. So you've got a little bit of that reverb light in, just sort of bouncing around the underside and the side here. You can get a little bit under here too, where it's bouncing up onto there and then rebounding again. You can really kind of come up with the story. A little bit over here and down this edge. Or maybe I'll come down a tiny bit. And then again, a little bit on this little edge here. A couple of taps and scrapes just to see what lands, see what kind of detail sort of looks okay. And then a little bit off the end here too. And then where I've got this kind of groove here, I can imagine then, okay, maybe there's a surface here that's just kind of pointing enough that it's coming round and catching it. And then again, we can make up whatever we like. So we'll just do a little kind of groove here, maybe a little bit there too. Just very, very subtle nods to the general structure of this. And I think I'll even do like a few more little ones here. Let's go ahead and just add in the tiniest little bit down into that point as well, just to kind of isolate that shape a bit more. And I think I'll just pack that in with an extra little dash there. So that's roughly what we want to be aiming for at this stage. We then want to go ahead and repeat the same steps. New layer, clipping mask it, blend mode change to add, and then we'll grab the yellow in the middle of the 5th column. Follow suit, we're just brightening up certain points. So bring your size down to like a 9%, brighten up the areas that are applicable. So a little bit under here, I'm going to go along there, and then maybe like a little bit up here. I'm going to go ahead and kind of follow up there, like there's a lot of light bouncing around. Most definitely over here, this little ledge sticking out, and then boom, down there, nice and bright. A little bit on the top there too. Where do I think that the light's going to catch? Definitely on there. Definitely on here. And then sod it, let's add a little tiny bit on there too. So we've got a little bit more tone in there, lots of light. I'm going to go ahead and just brighten this up quite a bit on this little sort of point there. Lovely. Lots of structure to it, looking awesome. And again, same way, we go ahead and create a new layer, tapping on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab the middle of the 4th column. I'm going to set the brush size to the 19%. We'll keep it at 35% opacity. And we're just going to go ahead and isolate the different shapes. So again, I'm going to have to darken up here just to bring this guy out a little bit more. And also create additional sort of shaping here. So like a little something like this, a little bit further up. And then lots of vertical lines in here for the rocky kind of structure and how it dips down maybe into there. Nice and dark in behind here. Deep dark grooves of the rock source here. Let's go ahead and add in a bit of a shadow in behind there too. Nice and dark in this little area here, I think. And then again, there's lots of lines just following suit all the way up against some of your highlights that you've created. Most definitely nice and dark under here, although we are going to add in that very dark tone in a second anyway. So it kind of gets a bit flattened on the top, and then you can come down. You can create horizontal lines that connect areas and also sort of isolate big grooves here. Another little sort of cutaway there, a little bit of detail on here. Let's go ahead and do more grooving. And then ultimately, we should be there. We can just go ahead and maybe darken up a tiny bit in there too. And that should be what we're aiming for. Again, new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab the bottom then of the 4th column. We will drop the opacity to 20%. We'll keep it at the 19 just for a second. We'll darken up certain areas like here, for example, just darkening up in there. A little bit of dark tone, and then definitely in this sort of crevice here between these two rocky kind of structures, it would be very dark, no light getting in there at all. And you can go ahead and just create dark grooves, again, near your highlight tones. So just grooves on either side look perfectly fine. Make sure at the top here, you do end up with quite a dark shadow. So just bring it to 50% and be brave with it and chuck in this dark tone here just to kind of show this kind of connecting area here between these two. And then a little bit lower. We'll go down to 9% and we'll just get down into some of these grooves. And then just working out where we want to try and really create dark elements. Let's go 19% size and 35 again. I've created enough small ones there just for a minute. Nice and dark into here, up there, and keep going. Then we'll go a little bit darker in here too, a little bit higher, cut across, something like this. Blending this together, creating a lovely little gradient. Zoom in all the way out. You should then have some nice separation between all of those rocky elements. And I wouldn't overdo it. Keep them to sort of a very simple level of shadow. A little bit maybe across the base here, a couple of little dashes, little dark groove in behind here will look fantastic because the sunlight's there. I would imagine that this area is quite dark. I will separate this a bit more by adding in a bit more darkness. But ultimately, we've got loads of separation then in this big rocky structure. And by separation, I mean that we've got one sort of triangular shape here, then one straight in behind it. Got another triangular shape here. We've got this little side area, and then you've got the main body here as well. So that's roughly what we're kind of aiming for. We can move on to the path area at the front here now. So we can go to our layers and collapse right Rick down. We can open up the path. We've got an empty layer here. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the top here of the third column from the right. We're then going to go ahead and set the brush size to something around about, say, 50%, I think. And we'll set the opacity to 35%. We want to go ahead and start drawing in some horizontal kind of steps. Your angle's very important here. So you kind of want to have like it coming across, set out a bit of a kind of angle that you're happy with to start with, and then just keep following suit. Don't make the gaps perfect in any way. We want to make sure this is a really kind of natural looking path. I'm just going to set the opacity back to 35% because I just nudged it. And then as you make your way further back, you can press really lightly, bring your brush size down to like 30%. So you can start getting very, very small with the steps and just keep bringing them all the way up and around to the top. Notice how sometimes I've got just big, dark, empty gaps. That is perfectly fine. Once we get to the top up here, you can just do like one final step and that's it. The detail falls off, it collapses, gets crushed down. And then we can go back up to like a 50% and just carry on down here a little bit as well. So we can start to maybe darken up some of the surfaces of some of these steps. They don't want to have to be evenly gapped either. They could be natural kind of steps or just very sort of organic steps really. And then as you make your way along here, less steps, but more just like a general coating. Now, as you can see, my rock there is in front of my path. So I just need to go ahead and make sure that extra rocks here, they are underneath the path group. So just drag it underneath like so, and then go back to your layer that we were coloring in on the path. And again, you just want to kind of really make sure that there's a good amount of kind of color for the steps to a degree. So some nice and bright, some nice and thin, some nice and chunky, and some nice and dull, everything in between. I want to make sure I do leave some gaps in there though, just so it looks quite nice and organic. But don't forget to equally try and create like lines in here that kind of go a bit against this kind of horizontal nature and just like make it look like they are a bit uneven. They're not just perfectly carved horizontal lines. So if I bring my brush size down to that, what size is that now? 19%. I can go across the kind of top edge of some of those steps and create kind of curve lines in them and all sorts of just unevenness and natural kind of breaks in them, just to show again the rock's not been cut by like a machine or anything. You know, maybe once upon a time, but ultimately it's got quite a natural look to it. So I'm just coming across some of these rocks now and the shapes of them. And that looks okay for now. We can go ahead and bring out a lot more of the highlights here, but we also want to go ahead and adjust the shape because now we've got our kind of shape of our steps and where they are. We can go ahead and go to the layer for the base shape, tap on it and add a mask to it. Don't worry if you've not used a mask before, it's just a way of hiding part of a layer without actually deleting it. So we want to be on the mask here, your color set to black at the bottom of the disc. Go to your brush and just change it up to 1, just to the studio pen, and make sure it's maximum opacity and keep the size around about say 10%. And what you want to be doing is you want to be looking for where you've got the area here of your sort of lighter tone. You want to be going across it slightly as if it's the top surface of the step, and then go down the brown and across. So you're creating these little steps. So you go across the blonde kind of looking color, go up across the brown, delete the excess, and And then you should end up with this kind of more chiseled step look to it. So again, coming across into the brown, I'm going up, and I'm going to look across. I don't think I necessarily need to come across too much out of an angle, just at this very top bit, and then up, and then across, and then up. And then as you get further back, you don't really need to do it anymore, because these steps here, the ones right in front of us, we want this kind of more step-like shape to it. So same rules. Every time you see the brown area, you cut down, and then you can go ahead and just make your way sort of across now. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to have a big flat surface here for the top of this step, and then I'll just cut down into this little gap here like that. And sometimes they can just be like mainly just all this kind of light blondish color. That's perfectly fine. It's just the surface of the step there is just a large chunk of stone. You may even need to go ahead and sort of sharpen up the angles a little bit, you know, come across it a little bit, then I come across it a little bit again like this, just to make them a little bit more cohesive and sort of fit the rest of the aesthetic, because the initial line that we created had no highlight or shaping to it, that we had no idea what we were drawing to a degree. And then I'm going to come down a tiny bit here, and then cut across the blonde, and again down, across. And then as you get further down here, you can just rough up the edge a tiny bit. It's not meant to be steps at this point. It's meant to be kind of just ground and dirt. So you can just rough up the edge. As long as you have this step-like shape now to this side, it's fine. And then over here, you can equally do a similar kind of principle. You can go up now in the brown and across. So every time you can see here, I've got the sort of the blonde area again is the top surface, so I can go across it and then down into the brown, up the brown, and then across the blonde. Either, it doesn't really matter the order, just as long as you kind of chisel away at it, creating some steps. And that should then be enough just to give you far more sort of sharpness to this area. Let's go ahead and continue coloring this a bit further. So we're going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it, change the blend mode from normal to add, go to your colors and grab then the middle of the third column from the right. Brush wants to go back to dry ink, and then we want to go ahead and make sure the opacity is 35% size. I think we can get away with a 19. And we're just going to really go to town now on brightening these up. Take your time though, maybe set the opacity to 20 if you're a bit unsure. In fact, we can go 30% there, because a lot of these steps are fairly large. And I can just go along some of these steps now, randomly choosing where I want to sharpen up, where do I want to brighten up as well. I do imagine that this is blocking a tiny bit of light, like more up here. So these steps right in front of us, you can go to town on, you can really add some nice bright tones on here. And as you get a bit further back, just let them very quickly kind of fall off where the light just can't quite wrap up there. But here in front of us, we can add some more bright tones in here. I definitely want to add some coming off of the edge of the step there, just to really kind of show the sun is able to catch onto here. There we go. Brightening up the edge of our path for us, also sort of just bringing it to the sort of forefront a bit more as well. Now, because this is in sort of an area of focal point, you kind of want to sort of set your brush size quite small. I would imagine even smaller than that, about 5%. And then in here, you kind of want to pick like little areas of grooving, if you can, on top of the step, and just detail it a tiny bit more with some squiggles and wiggles, and maybe even sharpen up the edge of the step there if you want to, but just some additional kind of squiggly kind of detail in there, little dashes and whatnot. I definitely need to fix that, don't I? I will do that shortly. But we'll come across here, little dashes, go all the way over to the left-hand side as well, and then just see where you've maybe added in some of that previous tone, and say, can I add some more detail? Because this is so close to us, you have to start to factor in, foreground focal point potentially, and the fact that it's so close to us that the detail needs to be present to pull it off. I'm just going to go ahead and put some dashes. Now, slow down with your highlights once you get to around about here, because we then want to go ahead and create a new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it also. Go to your colors and grab the middle of the, it's the middle of the fourth column from the right, and then equally add in some shadow tones. So here in these kind of grooves in between your steps in the brown areas, you can then darken these up. You can equally go ahead and add detail here with a much smaller brush size, but with a very dark tone. You can even look for some of your areas there, like there, for example, and just drawing a big, deep, dark groove that kind of connects it to the side profile potentially. Now, your shadows don't necessarily just have to sit in this kind of brown area here in between your steps. you can go ahead and just draw in some lovely small areas of detail, very similar kind of fashion to what we've been doing throughout the whole of this tutorial duration. Bring the brush size down, maybe even set the opacity up to 35% so you can be a bit brave with these quite sharp dashes, scrapes. They could be divots, they could be tiny little rocks even. You could draw in like the edge of what you think is a rock and then cast a shadow behind it. All sorts of just uneven, natural randomness in here. Darken that up. And I did one thing I do need to make sure I'm doing is if I go to 19%, is occasionally just darkening up a few of the steps so that they have a little bit of variety to one another. So I can just darken that up, darken this left side up. This one over here, it's a big flat surface on it. I think I could darken that. And then maybe even like little shadows running a bit further higher as well, off to that left-hand side, darkening them up. Let's go back down then to something very small, around about 4% size. And again, just keep detailing, keep detailing. And it's not to say that you can't just draw something in. Let's go 50% and then go back in with another highlight layer on top and add in like rocks and small little pebbles and everything in between that you can think of based on what you've drawn here with your much brighter tones. I'm just going to create little grooves here and there. Zoom in all the way out just to see how the detail's coming along. It might not be apparent very quickly. It might not be apparent at all. But you can just see what you can come up with, see what kind of level you can take the foreground to a little bit more. And just follow in suit with the rest of the design. And we've got obviously the ground and the extra rocks to do in a moment. So we're getting very close towards these latter stages. So potentially we could hold fire now on the detail of our path and come back to it later on once we've concluded the rest of the design. So that should be your kind of elevated path all done. Let's then move into the ground first, because then we can go ahead and work out our shadows. So let's collapse the path down. We'll go into the ground group and we've got an empty layer in here. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the middle of the first column. Brush probably wants to be around about say 40% for now. And we'll keep the opacity nice and low at 20. We want to zoom in and I'm just rotating for ease. I'm just going to go left to right in the distance. And then I'm trying to kind of layer in the color, but also leave gaps. You can always go back to your eraser, of course, if you need to. And then just behind here, where I imagine the sand kind of sort of mounds up a little bit, either side of this kind of entrance to the underside of this, natural bridge almost, banking up a little bit of brighter tone there. And then in the distance, I'm just going to keep going, brightening up the sand in the distance, but trying to leave like a dark groove, etc., in different places where the sand mounds as it makes its way through this little sort of gap here. And then more and more color in here. Don't worry about your rocks for now. Just keep blanketing in the bright tone here, up and into here. A little bit of just trying to show the contour as well of the ground. So like a little bit across there too. And go right up against your path. Equally over here, a little bit of light tone in behind there, like a big mound of the sand on the opposite side. And if you do it at that kind of angle, it really raises this up and out. And then again, maybe a little bit in behind here. Maybe this flows off and down to the kind of right-hand side now where it continues to fall down even further and then kind of curves up into here. You're just dictating and showing the kind of flow of the landscape by adding in all these color tones. And again, I'm going to brighten up in here. Lovely. And random layering and building up of your brush because it's at a low opacity will give you so much more tone. Let's then go to our layers and create another new layer. We'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it. We're going to tap on the layer and change its blend mode to add. We're going to go to our color and we're going to grab this tone here, bottom of the first column. You want to be very low with your opacity and size. I'm going to keep it the same because I was quite comfortable with it. You want to be very, very light with this and sparing, but you're looking on top of where you've added in the color just a second ago. Keep your pressure nice and light. I might go even lower with the opacity, 12% and even larger, about 50 with the size. And then I'm just going to build up on top of there, especially in the distance. You're now showing someone where that sun is just landing on the ground in the distance. And that's fine. You can make it nice and bright because it is so far away. It's unobstructed by the formations that we've been making here. And you can just build up Lovely detail in the distance, especially here, you know, the bright tone that sits just on the other side of this little structure here. And you want some of those quite bright yellowy tones, you know, really lovely, beautiful bright tones. And then you want to take a look at your design and say, well, this area here is going to be shadowed because of the sun. And once it maybe gets over the top there, can we go ahead and say brighten up, say down here, right in the kind of corner down here, raising in, bringing in a little bit of highlight. Does it kind of just trickle in the tiniest little bit based on the angle still coming through? We can dictate that. We can decide what that looks like. And then I think it's best to be sparing. So try to sort of not do too much in this area. Let the sunlight really kind of fade out. But then you can bring it back in again, like over here. Let's equally go ahead and just make sure we've got some lighting just in behind here. Because of course this is all equally unobstructed as well, right up into the distance. You just want to try again, just try and leave empty void spaces. But ultimately some really lovely bright spots in behind there. Would the sun just about creep round? Sure, let's say it does. It's a little bit on there. Again, leaving this kind of space a little bit more void, like so. I'm going to really try and go for some quite bright spots in here, just to try and add in a bit more that lovely sunshine. And I might even brighten it up quite a bit in behind there too, which then explains why we're getting this beautiful amount of kind of reverb light bouncing up and onto the surface above, or the underside of the rocky area. Let's then go ahead and shadow in behind here as well while we're working on the ground. So let's create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors. Let's go ahead and grab the top here of the fourth column. We're going to zoom in and just tip our pen on its side. So I've still got a 55% and then a 12% opacity. And then just in here, let's bring that opacity up. Let's go 35. We don't need to be that dark. Light, should I say. We want to just really make sure that we have a big shadow caused by this area here. So nice and dark under here. We are going to darken this up with another tone, but just for now I want to make sure that I've got a general just dark shadow tone sitting in there that's of a lighter variety. Maybe a little bit of shadow underneath these rocks ahead of us working on them too. A little bit of a shadow cast underneath them. A little something under here, little teeny tiny one under that guy there. These ones here, we can be quite firm with them because it looks like they're going to be in some bit of a direct area of sunlight as well, so they can get a bit of a shadow. Now these ones under here, these ones here, you don't want to do too heavy of a shadow, but these ones you do. You want to bring that down to like a 30% and get right in behind them, darkening them up because they're just going to have such a heavy shadow because the sun is just so ferocious in that area. And then along the edge here of our rocky formation, not going outside of it though, you want to start just making sure you go along here in some dark grooves. And I'm doing it all in one formation as we currently make our way through it. So I'm just going along here, darkening up inside there, darkening up inside there, dragging that out just a little bit like so, just making sure it's nice and dark in there. And then once we've got a good little blanket area there of shadow, I'm just trying to triple check I've not missed anything. I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to go ahead and grab the bottom of that fourth column. Now I will go ahead and go to my layers and create another new layer just in case I need to tone it down. So I'll tap on it and clipping mask it. I will then tap away, and then definitely like in some of these dark grooves here, you want to darken up. And then kind of in the middle area almost of your shadow that you just created, you kind of just want to darken that up. So maybe even with a slightly larger brush size so you're not too, not drawing in too much of a specific shape. And then just darkening up inside certain areas, making sure you've got that really dark sort of ground shadow. And then over here, deep dark groove there, that gets a really nice dark shadow in there, dark shadow in there too. Blending it out where you can. Just taking your time just to zoom out constantly, triple check you've not added in too much, it's not too dark. A little bit around the kind of base of some of these will look nice, especially these ones in the distance, just a little bit of extra darkness just on the rear of them. Teeny tiny amount though. And then a little bit of darkness under there too. That's looking cool. And then that's pretty much it. I think you could darken up underneath this one just so it's a bit more cohesive with this big dark shadow. And then I think that's about it. So I'm just adding a few more in the kind of grooves here of the flow of the land. Just make sure that's nice and dark under there. And then maybe like a tiny little bit of a drag out here with some very light tipped pressure of the Apple Pencil. Awesome. That's looking nice, and we've got a nice amount of contrast in there now. We've just got to do our little rocks. So let's collapse the ground down. Let's go into extra rocks and tap on the empty layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab then the top of the 5th column. Brush wants to be around about 30% in size, probably around about 20% in opacity, because a lot of these are not actually in the sunlight. So we just need to try and define shapes. So over here in the distance, yeah, go for it. Absolutely add in loads of detail. In fact, they're so small, you could probably go down to that 9% sizing and really add in some fun shaping to them and get quite high with the opacity if you want to, and really go for it. A little bit under here too, you know, adding in little taps and scrapes as you might be able to hear, but ultimately just brightening up that side that's facing the light source, giving it a good solid coat of that lighting. And then you want to go probably 19 and then bring that size opacity down to 20 again, and now start building up some of these rocks in here that are a little less, you know, in that limelight. You still want to kind of give them shape, but you don't want to sort of overdo it. So here, for example, this is why we've got such a low opacity. I'll sort of cut down here and come across it a bit, and then just add in a little bit of brightness on one side, maybe a little bit on the edge of that one, but just enough that you can work out the general shape of it. I'll do the same over here. I'll cut right across here, for example, and just create some grooves in there, a little bit on the kind of rear of it as well to show the general shaping. Maybe this top edge is a little bit flatter and does somewhat get a bit more lighting. And then maybe like another kind of scrape line down. Zoom all the way out, just get an idea for the shape, see if you like it, and just redo the lines if not. Again, we'll do here. So just repeating everything we've done in here. All of this whole tutorial is just a repetition of the exact same principles, except here we're just trying to make sure we show general shaping of some of these rocks without over highlighting them. We don't want to be adding in too much to them. They are not meant to be super bright at all. Potentially the very tip of that one maybe gets a little bit more lighting. Maybe this one here gets a little bit right on the very edge of the shape, but then in the gap here, for example, and as it falls off onto the rear of the rock, I'm imagining that it really would fall off quite a bit. And again, zooming all the way out just to get an idea for the shapes that I'm creating. Similar principle all the way through. So I'm hoping you're enjoying the process. Hopefully it's not been too stressful. I mean, please let me know in the comments. It really does help a lot to know what you think of these tutorials, and especially like how you got on. It's really important for me, your feedback. It helps me know what you want more of, and also what was potentially a bit too challenging, or I just need to revisit and just take a look and see, could I have done a better job of explaining it? Here, this rock, I'm imagining, just sticks up quite a bit because I imagine it's quite a large shape. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of create quite a few little sort of lines on here, creating that kind of sharp angular shaping and coming down. And then I think I can just maybe, can I get away with leaving the rear of that? I don't think I can. So I'm going to go ahead and set the brush size even bigger to like a 60% and just kind of brightening up one large volume of shape there. And a little bit in behind there too. I think that's just about enough that I can get away with that. Let's equally go ahead and see where we can do an add layer. So let's create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Change blend mode from normal to add. Go to your colors and grab the middle of the 5th column. Size wants to be really tiny, to be honest, about 4%, and we'll keep the opacity at 20. Zoom right in. These ones in the distance, absolutely bathed in the sunlight, so you can go to town on just really adding in a huge bright surface to some of those. Top edge, bang, loads of color, loads of color. A little bit on there, a little bit more on here. Those ones are lovely and bathed in the sunlight. You could probably get away with just kissing the edge of this one here. I think maybe just a little bit on the peak of here, just a tiny bit. These ones back here, I don't think you can get away with it, to be honest. Maybe the tiniest little scrape and then maybe a little guy on here, but that's it. These ones are most definitely in the shade, although maybe the tip of this one, it may look a bit confusing, so we'll take a look at how it looks. I'm going to go ahead and just make the brush size a bit bigger as I do this and just see if I can brighten up the top of it, just as if the sun is just going over the top, which hopefully brings it a bit closer towards us. So I'm just going to see if I can get away with that, and I'll take a look towards the end and see if I need to revisit that. Now, equally, we just need to shadow in them as well. So we'll go ahead and create another new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab then the middle of the fourth column. Similar principles again to exactly everything we've done before, just darker siding to the opposite side. So I'm going to go 19% now on the sides. I'm going to bring the opacity up to 50 because we can just pack in some of this dark tone here. On the rear, little something like that, a little bit darker. Should match up with the rest of the styling then. Forgotten about this little fella down here. A little bit of a dark groove in there. A little bit of darkness on the rear. Just seeing where I can just scatter some colour. Because they're quite small shapes as well, it's not really sort of mega, to be honest, to have to really lock in and say, actually, no, I really need to do this, this, and this. You can get away with keeping it fairly quite straightforward and then a little bit behind there too. And that should be about it, really. We do need to do a slightly darker tone just to match up with the rest. So we'll create one more new layer for this area. Tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab the bottom of the fourth column. And again, we'll bring that opacity down to 20%. Size can stay at 19, and we can then work in some slightly darker areas here. So you can tip your pen on its side. It's probably the most appropriate way of doing this, and just give it a general bit of shadow, further shadow, you know, just like we did before. In certain grooves, you may feel it's necessary to add in a bit more darkness, like in behind that rock, for example, and a bit here, where the contrast would be very, very high because that's really, really super bright highlight. Then under here, we can get some darker tones, especially towards the bottom, especially as well if you've added in like a dark bit of black on the shadow on the ground. It's going to be quite necessary to do so. And then here on the rear, just sort of chucking in the colour on top of those brown lines on the rear surfaces that I know are kind of facing me, because wherever I'm stood here has got to be the up here, up on that hillside. And if I zoom all the way out, they should have that dark side to them. I'm going to cut across here, cut into this little area here now. Make sure this is quite dark because we do have this quite large shape here, creating quite a dark area here. So I can make this a little bit darker in general because it's just in a shadowed spot. And then up here, I'm going to darken up in behind here quite a bit, just to try and show that it's quite close to us and also separate the path as well. And I'll maybe just sharpen up a few edges, darken up in behind here, a little bit along there, just blending that out, hopefully, just enough. Now you can then go ahead and create a further layer, tap on it and clipping mask it and change the blend mode again to add. So now you're working again with further highlights. Go back to that yellow tone, the middle of the fifth column. Keep that opacity low, 20%, size probably 9. You could add like a little bit of this kind of reverb lighting around, as if like the light is bouncing up and off the sand and onto the surface of some of the very bottom edges of the rock, or maybe even just slightly up from the bottom anyway. Just giving it this kind of little bit of lighting that's just bouncing around the place, and then just bringing it all a bit more cohesively together. And again, we're trying to work towards the bottom now, just trying to show like up some of those lines that you created in surfaces. Would there be like a little bit of light just bouncing around? It should hopefully look quite nice then, and quite pleasing to the eye. A little bit along the bottom edge of this one, and a little bit along some of the ones back there too, even though they are, so see the sand would just be just an absolute light bulb. So even though they've got super bright highlights from the sun, the sand as well would be just kicking up a whole load of light up and onto the underside of a lot of these surfaces, which is why like something like that one looks very pleasing already, because you've got that kind of double reverb of the lighting. Now at this stage, we just need to add in some detail back here as well, just on there. So we're going to go ahead and collapse extra rocks down. We're going to go back into BG, and we've got that hillside there in the distance. So this one here, I'm going to create 2 new layers. So I'm going to create 2 new, tap on both and clip it to that shape. So clip both to it. And then the bottom one out the 2, change the blend mode to multiply and bring that opacity down to around about 30%. Then go back to your colors and change it just to the same color, but because it's set to multiply, so you want this color here, and because it's set to multiply, if we put our opacity at 50%, we'll put our size at 9, we can just start shading in here. So I'm going to go down the rear of some of these rocky formations. Turn off your guide if you can see that as well, just in case, so you can get rid of those pencil marks. And then just shading in on the rear, building up some color along behind some of these surfaces, and you can create all sorts of formations. Don't overthink it in the slightest. It's meant to be the rear of some very, very distant kind of hills. So don't stress over here. And then at the same time, just do a little bit like that. Then go back to your layers and go to the other layer above and change it to add. Bring that equally down to about 35%. And then draw in your highlights. So on that side here, you've got your face now of your highlights facing that light source. You can just punch in all this color in exactly the same way we've been doing it throughout the whole of it. But it's so far away that you can just get quite carefree with it, to be honest. And we don't want to overthink it either, because when you zoom out, that's as far as they are. And it's up to you. You can lower the opacity on them even further. You can keep them nice and bold. For example, I might bring my shadows down just a tiny bit and down in a little bit more in the highlights as well, because I don't want them to standing out too much. So I've gone 23% on the add and 21% on the shadows. And so therefore it's just pushed a lot further back. Now at this stage, we just need to do some very final bits of refinement. So if you flattened your layers down, that's still not a problem at all. For example, you want to go into main rock and just grab the shape. If you flattened it into one, it makes no difference. Tap on the main shape and go to the option of mask. On your mask here, make sure your color is set to black perfectly at the bottom of the disc, and your brush needs to change back to Studio Pen just above. You want maximum opacity, a fairly small size, like 10%. And this is where you can now really try to better define the shape. So if you've got this nice dark shadow here, cut into there and then cut across and create more interesting, very sort of rocky-like shapes here that just look far more intriguing to the eye. So you can cut right into there and then create like this kind of swoop under. Don't make it too repetitive like that. So maybe I'll cut into there and kind of show that that's a deep groove on the end. And look how much more interesting that is to look at. So on the top, we can't really do too much up here nor down here, to be honest, because this structure is all very important here. If anything, we can come over to this big tall area and say, right, we'll cut into there and then come back out of it and then just sharpen up any edges. If you want to really get rid of kind of these sloped edges and create kind of more spiky looking kind of rocky area like this now. So we've got much more of a sharp aesthetic to that. And I can go down, I can go down, and I can go down just to create that kind of staggered rock look. And up here, I can go ahead and cut into there and maybe just like flatten this area off as if it's like in a separate plane. So if I zoom out, far more interesting to look at. Likewise, you can go ahead and do the same effect for your right rock or right rick. You can tap on it and add a mask to it. Tap away, and then over here, just get in there and start cutting away at this area here, cut into there in a similar fashion and maybe sharpen up the edges, see what interesting shapes you can come up with. At the same time, you can go ahead and do a similar process here, like cut into the bottom of the rock here. I wouldn't overdo this sort of idea because depending on if you've not done your shadows in the right way, they'll look a little bit odd. So just try and keep that to a minimum if you can. Here, I think I could maybe cut into there a little bit better. And likewise here, I want to basically get rid of a few of those quite smooth, curvy lines. I want them to be a little bit more aggressive and a bit more sharp. So I can cut across here, all the way up to the top, I think. And then as I've been doing lately, I tend to lean a lot with my colors towards a lesser saturated look. So what you can do is you can go right to the top of your layers and create a new layer, tap away, 3 fingers down and go to copy all. Swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. You get a whole new layer with your whole design on. So now you can just freely edit it how you wish. You can go ahead and go to your adjustments. I can go to my curves, for example. I could go ahead and bring the curves up, sort of flattening the shadows. I could bring in the highlights a little bit more, really kind of giving a much more flat approach to it. Or I could bring that shadow across, bringing in the darkness a bit more, creating a much more of a silhouette style approach to it, emphasizing that contrast a bit more. It is totally up to you. At any time, you can tap with 1 finger, you get this little menu and you can hold down on preview to see the before and after. And of course, you're not destroying anything because your design is still completely looked after because this is a whole new layer that we can mess around with. I could bring those highlights back down a little bit, but increase the darkness potentially. And I could just mess around with this all day long, to be honest, just seeing what I can adjust, see what kind of approach we can change. That looks pretty good like that, to be honest. It's fairly close, but I'm just bringing in the shadows a tiny, tiny bit. And then I'll tap on my adjustments when I'm done. I'm going to go up to my adjustments and go again into the option here of hue, saturation, and brightness. You can mess around here by increasing the brightness oversaturating it. I think with this particular palette today, you will very quickly oversaturate. So maybe just 2% there if you do decide to do that. Or keep it to a much more flat approach. Again, you've got a layer now you can just keep messing around with. The other thing you can always do is go to your color balance. You can look, for example, at your highlights. Do you want to make them a little bit more blue toned here? And drag it all the way to the extreme and see the difference. And the highlights, by the looks of it, is just affecting that sky a bit more. So we don't really want to touch that. We've got our midtones. Do you want to make them a little bit more red? Add in a bit of cyan for contrast, give it a bit more of a movie themed kind of vibe to it. Or go the opposite way. You can really mess around with these, and sometimes you get something really horrifically garish, and then at other times you'll get something that looks really quite pleasing to the eye, and it's just a matter of just finding that sweet spot. You can turn off the layer, of course, and see the difference between before and after, but I'm happy with the before, so I'm going to pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Instagram and Facebook are great places for me to see your finished work. Make sure to subscribe to the channel because I release Procreate tutorials every single week here on the channel. I have done for 4 years now. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon. That's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters. I have a catalogue over there now of over 130 exclusive tutorials that only patrons get access to. So make sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.